There's a strange truth about people who feel most at peace when they're alone. They weren't born that way. They didn't come into the world preferring an empty room to a crowded one. They didn't naturally choose silence over connection. Something happened first. Something that made solitude feel safer than other people ever did. Most people assume this is just introversion, but the truth runs much deeper than a personality type. This preference for being alone, really alone, genuinely at peace in the quiet, is often a survival pattern, one that was written into the nervous system very early, by a particular kind of childhood that taught a child to turn inward before they could reach outward. And over time, solitude stopped feeling like loneliness. It became the most reliable shelter they'd ever known. I'm Charlotte, and in this video, we're going to walk through 6 psychological traces from childhood that explain why some people feel fundamentally safer alone than they do around other people. Stay until the end, because you might realize that the silence you've been carrying for years has a meaning you've never been given language for. Trace 1. Insecure attachment. When a child is frightened, their instinct is to run toward the person who's supposed to keep them safe. In a healthy environment, that person is there, consistent, warm. And the child's brain forms a belief. The world is safe. People can be trusted. But what happens when that cycle breaks? What if the adult's response was unpredictable? Warm one day, cold the next, comforting on Tuesday, and furious about the same thing on Wednesday? You never knew which version of them you were walking into. So you learned to read the room before you entered it. You scanned faces. You measured silences. You tried to predict the weather before the storm. When this goes on long enough, a child's brain draws a conclusion to protect itself. Connection is a risk. In psychology, this is called insecure attachment. When love comes with unpredictability, the instinct to reach toward others slowly dissolves. Not because you hate people, because trusting someone who might change at any moment feels genuinely dangerous. As you grew up, this shaped everything. You can still function well in relationships. You can still show up. But there's always an invisible line, an unspoken boundary that no one is allowed to cross. And you feel most at peace when you're alone, because solitude gives you what your childhood never could. Consistency. It doesn't change its attitude. It doesn't break its promises. When you're alone, you're in complete control. And that silence is the only thing your nervous system knows. It can fully trust. Trace 2. Invisible emotions. Some of the deepest childhood wounds leave no visible marks. They don't come from violence or explosive conflict. They come from absence. From the specific, painful absence of being truly seen. In psychology, this is called childhood emotional neglect, CEN. And unlike abuse, it isn't about what was done to you. It's about what wasn't. Your family might have been perfectly functional on paper. Enough food, warm clothes, good schools. From the outside, nothing to complain about. But emotionally, you were on your own. It happened in small moments. You came home upset about something that felt deeply unfair, and the response was, "You're crying about that? Stop it." You tried to explain a fear, and you were waved off. What does a child have to worry about? You brought home something you were proud of, and received a half-hearted nod. Your emotions existed. They just weren't met. And a child cannot give up on their parents, so they give up on their own needs instead. At some point, your brain decided to turn off the expression switch. You stopped explaining. You stopped crying in front of people. You stopped expecting anyone to truly listen. You created a rule. Every emotion gets processed internally. Look at how that pattern lives in you now. When something devastating happens, a loss, a rupture, crushing pressure, your first instinct isn't to reach for someone. It's to close the door, to sit with it alone, to figure it out yourself. Even when people check on you, the automatic answer is, I'm fine. You're not cold. You're not arrogant. You learned very early and very painfully that bringing your emotions into the light only got you indifference. So you stopped bringing them. When you're alone, no one can dismiss what you're feeling. In that quiet space, you're finally allowed to feel it without having to defend it. Trace 3. Forced independence. The world celebrates independence. We treat it as a sign of maturity, of strength, of having it together. But for many people who prefer solitude, their independence isn't a medal, it's a scar. It didn't come from choice, it came from necessity. In psychology, this is called parentification, the process by which a child is pushed into an adult role before they've had the chance to be a child. Maybe there was financial strain, an emotionally unavailable parent, chronic conflict, illness. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. You became the one who held things together. You calmed yourself down when you were crying. You handled things children were never supposed to handle. And the adults around you praised you for it. She's so mature, so independent, never any trouble. That praise became a trap. The hidden message your brain absorbed was this: my worth comes from not being a burden. Needing help is not allowed. And so a core belief formed. Asking for help is weakness. Dependence is dangerous. By adulthood, this becomes what psychologists call hyper-independence. You're excellent at managing your life. You're capable and competent and self-sufficient. But underneath that, there's a deep fear of needing anyone. You'd rather exhaust yourself than ask for help. Because asking means risking rejection, or risking someone letting you down. When you're alone, you feel powerful, safe. When you don't depend on anyone, no one can disappoint you. The empty room is the only place where you can take off the mask and simply exist without performing. Trace 4. An overstimulating home. Home is supposed to be the most peaceful place a child knows. For some people, it was the most overwhelming. If you grew up in a space that was chronically loud, tense, or unpredictable, a television always blaring, adults always arguing, doors always slamming, your nervous system had to work overtime from a very young age just to manage the noise. You learned to hold your breath, to listen for footsteps, to read the energy in a room before you entered it. You were in a constant state of quiet alertness. That doesn't disappear when you leave the house. It becomes the baseline your nervous system operates from. It explains why, as an adult, you drain faster than most people in social situations. Why a crowded room with competing sounds and overlapping conversations feels like a direct assault. Why just go out and socialize, it'll help, is advice that misses the point entirely. For your nervous system, social noise activates the same stress state as that loud, tense house from childhood. It isn't social anxiety exactly. It's a body remembering what it learned to survive. The empty room isn't hiding. It's recovery. It's the only environment where your parasympathetic nervous system can fully activate, heart rate slowing, muscles releasing, mind finally quieting. For you, solitude isn't a preference. It's a biological need. Trace 5. High sensitivity. This one is different from the others because it doesn't come from environment. It comes from how you were built. About 15 to 20% of the population are what psychologists call highly sensitive persons, HSPs. Their nervous systems process everything more deeply. Sound, light, emotion, atmosphere. Where other people experience life in standard definition, HSPs experience it in something closer to ultra-high definition. And most significantly, they absorb other people's emotional energy. As a child, you could feel the tension between your parents before anyone said a word. Your chest ached when a classmate cried. You felt deeply uneasy in rooms full of forced cheerfulness. And because you had no filter separating your emotional world from the world around you, you absorbed it all. If you grew up in an environment that didn't understand this, where you were told you were too sensitive, too much, a crybaby, you learned quickly that the safest thing was to limit contact, to build space between yourself and the emotional noise. As an adult, this shows up as what some people call a social hangover. You can connect deeply, listen well, be genuinely present for the people you care about. And then, immediately after, you need to disappear. Not because you didn't enjoy it, because you've hit full capacity. You've absorbed everything in the room, and now you need to process it somewhere quiet. Solitude, for an HSP, isn't withdrawal. It's emotional cleansing. It's wringing out the sponge, restoring the boundary between your inner world and everything outside it. Trait 6, conditional love. Think back. Were you a child who received a lot of praise? Top of your class, well-behaved, the one everyone pointed to as an example. From the outside, a model childhood. But your brain was quietly recording something else. It noticed that the warmth came with conditions. Adults smiled when you brought home the A. They hugged you when you performed well in front of guests. But when you failed, when you struggled, when you showed weakness, that warmth pulled back, replaced by sighs, by cold disappointment, by a silence that felt like withdrawal. You learned, love is not freely given. Love is a transaction. To receive it, you must earn it. The result is an adult who, in the presence of other people, is always performing, always scanning, trying to sense what's needed, what's expected, how to be good enough to keep people close. And that is exhausting, in a way that's very hard to explain. Being alone is relief, because it's the only time the performance can stop. No one to read, no one to manage, no standard to meet. In solitude, for the first time, you're allowed to just be without the fear that being yourself will cost you someone's love. When you place all 6 traces beside each other, insecure attachment, invisible emotions, forced independence, an overstimulated nervous system, high sensitivity, and conditional love, a completely different picture emerges. Not introversion, not coldness, not being difficult or hard to reach. A person who learned, through a very specific kind of childhood, that solitude was safer than the alternative. Your mind did something extraordinary. It protected you. It built a shelter that worked. But here's what's worth sitting with now. The shield that kept you safe from pain then has become, in some ways, the wall that keeps good things from reaching you now. When you build a system that needs no one, you also accidentally close the door to the people who genuinely want to be there. The most important question isn't why do I like being alone? It's this: am I choosing solitude or am I defaulting to it? Choosing brings peace, freedom, intentionality. Defaulting is a conditioned reflex, automatic, unconscious, often driven by fear rather than genuine preference. The goal isn't to stop needing quiet. Solitude is real and valuable and necessary for some people in ways it simply isn't for others. That doesn't need to change. The goal is awareness, because when you understand where a behavior comes from, you take back the choice. You can recognize the difference between genuinely needing rest and reflexively hiding because your nervous system is running an old alarm. You deserve silence when you need it. And you also deserve connection that doesn't require you to perform for it. Of the 6 traces we explored today, which one left the deepest mark? Leave it in the comments. Not as a test or a label, but because sometimes the most important thing is simply having your experience reflected back to you and recognized. I'm Charlotte. If this gave language to something you've been carrying quietly, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And I'll see you in the next one.